Morning, everyone, and welcome to the New Perkins Administrator Orientation Session 2. Thank you all for joining. Again, I am Janelle Washington, Director for CTE at the Illinois Community College Board, and we should be joined by our ICCB Perkins core team, Felita Murphy, Katie Velez, and Aja Howard this morning. And then also on the call, as you already met, Brittany Boston and Dr. Amy Julian from ICSPS. And I would just like to say thank you to Amy and Brittany for helping to host. And if you were on the call last week, you know that Amy also helped to kind of level set and give us the history of Perkins. And so thank you both for your continued support. Here's what we have on today's agenda. So we'll talk about the orientation overview. Then we'll get into a deep dive of Perkins. So that's the what. We're going to use the what, so what, now what method today. So the what is Perkins deep dive. So what, how does this impact me as a Perkins administrator? And then now what, how will you apply today's information? And then we will wrap up. So I did want to just kind of revisit again why we're here for the new Perkins administrator orientation. So the orientation again came about at the request of Perkins administrators throughout the state who wanted a comprehensive introduction from ICCB around administering the Perkins V grant locally. And so that's why we're here today. Some of the information, I mentioned this last time, but some of the information might be repetitive if you've been working in post-secondary or with Perkins, or if you've had training through your institution as far as the Perkins grant. Sorry about that. So just keep in mind that this was geared toward new Perkins administrators. So again, like I said last time, take what you need and leave the rest. The sessions, again, as Brittany mentioned, are being recorded, and we hope to use these for future new Perkins administrators. And so if you have any questions, just hold them to the end or put them in the chat. Again, just wanted to introduce our ICCB CTE team and highlight the core Perkins ICCB team who you'll talk to regarding your Perkins grants. So we will dive in with the what, which is the Perkins deep dive. So as we kind of mentioned last week, the full name of the current iteration of Perkins is the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, but we know it fondly as Perkins V. And again, this is the federal legislation that guides and provides some funding for CTE. And because Perkins is all about CTE, if I don't know if anyone is like me, where of course we work with CTE on a daily basis and we know exactly what it is, but sometimes it's hard to explain. And so I just wanted to share a definition from Advanced CTE that if you're like me, where you're like, how do I put this in words? I know what it is, but how do I put it in words? So this is a definition from Advanced CTE that I think provides a really good understanding that you can use when you're trying to explain CTE to others. So CTE is an educational option that provides learners with knowledge and skills they need to be prepared for college and careers. CTE gives purpose to learning by emphasizing real-world skills and practical knowledge within a selected career focus. Again, this is not that I doubt that anyone on the call knows what CTE is, but again, like I said, I know personally, I work with CTE every day, and sometimes it's like just nice to have some language that other people can understand. And then I've linked the full text of Perkins. You can find, Google Perkins, it'll come up for you. But here in the presentation, I just linked it in case anyone needs the legislation or wants to follow along. And I think before I move on, one more point about CTE is that when we're explaining CTE, it's important to think about how CTE sits at the intersection of education, workforce development, and economic development. And it connects all of those areas. So that's another way to kind of contextualize CTE. Okay, so what does Perkins do? Again, we kind of had our introduction to Perkins last week, as well as the history. But again, Perkins is a federal education program that invests in secondary, post-secondary, and adult career technical education programs in all 50 states, DC, and the territories. Perkins is dedicated to the continuous improvement and relevancy of CTE to meet the ever-changing needs of learners and employers. And Perkins increases learner access to high quality CTE programs of study. So as we kind of talked about last week with our introduction, Perkins authorizes the federal investment in CTE across the country. And as an education program, again, as I mentioned, it invests and provides funding for CTE. How does Perkins funding work? We kind of talked about this again last week as well. So Congress appropriates funds to Perkins on an annual basis. And then the states have to designate an eligible agency to administer Perkins and the funding. And this eligible agency must submit a plan to the U.S. Department of Education to receive funds. And so as we mentioned last week, the Illinois State Board of Education, or ISB, is our eligible agency that is a primary contact with the U.S. Department of Education. However, they designated ICCB as the post-secondary authority when it comes to Perkins. And so in order for locals to receive, so locals are considered local school districts, area technical centers, community and technical colleges, and could be pre-apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship programs. And so in order for locals to receive their funding, they have to submit an application to the eligible agency annually. And as we talked about last week, as far as the local allocation, that's determined via a formula. And we went through that last week, so we won't go back into that again. All right, so what do Perkins funds support? So a variety of activities, including programs to study. And again, I know that many of you are not really new to this, but also thinking about future new Perkins administrators, I'll go over the definition. So a program of study is a coordinated sequence of content across secondary and post-secondary education that addresses both academic and technical skills, includes challenging academic standards, aligns with the need of industry, progresses in specificity, and has multiple entry and exit points, and culminates in the attainment of a recognized post-secondary credential. And so with that, Perkins does allow funds to be utilized towards programs of study. But funds can also be spent on other activities that improve CTE, like professional development for CTE instructors, career guidance and advisement efforts, and data collection and analysis, and much more. However, one thing that I do want to point out is that Perkins funds must supplement and not supplant other state or local funds that are spent on CTE. And so now we'll talk about the major tenets of Perkins V. And this is kind of like highlighting some of these tenets are in comparison to Perkins 4, but also like they're the tenets of Perkins 5. And so some of the focus was carried on from Perkins 4, and then some things were totally new in Perkins 5. So the first major tenet is program improvement. So regarding CTE programs of study, they are emphasized throughout the legislation. So you'll find programs of study mentioned in various places throughout. And this is really to foster program improvement. The comprehensive local needs assessment. So local recipients are required to review student performance, program quality, and progress towards the implementation of CTE programs of study at least once every 2 years. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the CLNA, Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, or CLNA, and a little later in the presentation. So again, every 2 years, the CLNA is required, and local recipients are required to consult with a wide variety of stakeholders during the process, and it's submitted with the local application in order to receive funds. There's also the reserve fund that helps with program improvement. The reserve fund is an option that's available for eligible agencies to distribute. So that comes from the state level, and the state is able to hold or reserve 15% of the state's funds to go towards eligible recipients through an alternative method. And so this is separate from the Perkins allocation that everybody receives. Reserve funds are usually distributed either by formula or competition, or it could be a combination of both. But the funds must go to rural areas or areas with high numbers of percentages of CTE students, or areas with gaps or disparities in performance. And so ICCB uses reserve funding to address equity gaps in dual credit and CTE performance. And then additionally, we included in our state plan that reserve funding can also be used to expand innovation in the priority areas listed in the section of the state plan on state leadership activities. And those include expansion of integrated education and training, or ICAPs here in Illinois, programs of study development, expanding innovative delivery models, and then improving career guidance and academic counseling. So another way that Perkins supports program improvement is through a national competitive grant program called the Perkins Innovation and Modernization Grant. And so every so often, the U.S. Department of Education will release a competitive grant to identify, support, and evaluate evidence-based innovative strategies and activities with the hope of improving and modernizing CTE and aligning workforce skills with labor market needs. That was written into so they were able to set aside funds to offer that competitive grant through the legislation. Then labor market alignment. So Perkins 5 includes strong emphasis on labor market alignment, and reviewing labor market information is one part of your comprehensive local needs assessment. And then finally, there's a focus on special populations and equity. And so Perkins 5 increased opportunities for special populations. And there's also an emphasis on disaggregating data to identify gaps and disparities in performance between groups of students, and not only to identify the gaps, but to also address those gaps. So the second major tenet is flexibility. So Perkins, as mentioned earlier, states have the ability to select the eligible agency that's going to receive the Perkins Fund and lead the implementation. And though, like I said, ISB is our eligible agency, they share responsibility with ICCB for the post-secondary side. And so it also gives states the authority to determine how they split the secondary and post-secondary, how funds are split between secondary and post-secondary, and also how to leverage funds. And also in Perkins 5, it allows support for career exploration to go as low as grade 5. And so in Perkins 4, there is a restriction that Perkins funds couldn't be used to support any grades below the 7th grade. And so Perkins 5 expanded access to the middle grades, which includes 5 through 8. And so that means that career exploration activities can be supported in the middle grades. And so yeah, when you're developing your Perkins applications, you can all consider students as low as grade 5. And that aligns to the Every Student Succeeds Act. And then also in terms of flexibility, Perkins also includes some alignment to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. And you'll definitely see that alignment in our state plan. All right, and so I just wanted to briefly touch base on the state uses the state leadership funds. So Perkins 5 updated the funding provisions that were in Perkins 4 to set up a structure in which states would not receive a Perkins basic grant that's less than the one that they received in 2018 unless Congress cut funding. And that ensured that states could still spend their Perkins funds flexibly. And so with that, eligible agencies have to direct the required direct funds to the required activities listed here. So that's preparation for non-traditional fields, programs for special populations, individuals and state institutions, recruiting, preparing, or retaining CTE teachers and faculty, technical assistance, and reporting on the effectiveness of funds. And so you'll often see that through grant opportunities or through our professional development opportunities that are provided on the state leadership side. And then there's also 25 permissible uses of state leadership funds, and those vary greatly in scope and feasibility. So a lot of them were retained from Perkins 4, but there are some new uses, such as recognize post-secondary credentials and work-based learning into programs of study, support for the integration of employability skills into CTE, supporting eligible recipients and eliminating inequities, and student access to high-quality programs of study and effective teachers. And so if you're interested, which we're going to kind of talk about in a little bit, you can most definitely check out the state plan to look at some of those activities that the state, both ISB and ICCB, planned to do with our leadership funds for FY25 through FY28. And then the third major tenet of Perkins 5 is data and accountability. So one thing that Perkins 5 did was defined who's included in the accountability system by providing a definition of a CTE concentrator. So at the secondary level, a CTE concentrator is a student served by an eligible recipient who has completed at least 2 courses in a single career and technical education program or program of study. And at the post-secondary level, a concentrator is a student who earned at least 12 credits within a CTE program or program of study, or completed a program or program of study that encompasses fewer than 12 credits or the equivalent in total. So it gave us the definition of a CTE concentrator, and you'll within, as we talk about the accountability indicators in a little bit, those are looking at CTE concentrators for the most part. It also set up a process for setting performance targets, and that includes a strengthened stakeholder engagement process. And so the way that we set our state's performance targets, which kind of talk about, these are the performance targets tied to the accountability indicators, and we set those during the state plan process. And so there's a lot of stakeholder engagement. The process is opened up for public comment before the state plan gets submitted to the U.S. Department of Education. And so if you were around earlier this summer, you probably either heard about the process, you were invited to participate in the stakeholder engagement process, and hopefully you provided public comment. So that's how the performance targets are set. So after that extensive stakeholder input, we'll set levels of performance for each indicator. If we want to change them, we can have the extensive stakeholder, and then we don't have to go into negotiate. So the way this changed is that you don't have to go into, the states no longer have to negotiate with the U.S. Department of Education regarding the performance indicators. We go through the stakeholder engagement process, and that allows us to set our own performance targets, and then we submit it to the U.S. Department of Education through our state plan. So as far as data and accountability, Perkins V focuses on the disaggregation of data. So really looking at the various populations and looking at those achievement and equity gaps. So Perkins V requires additional disaggregation by each core indicator of performance by CTE program or program of study. And then if you're not able to disaggregate at that level, Perkins V also allows disaggregation by career clusters or CTE concentrators. This is all listed in the law. And then finally, the Perkins V accountability indicators. So these are designed to assess the effectiveness of the state and local recipients in achieving statewide progress in career technical education, and to optimize the return on investment of federal funds in CTE education activities. And so we'll talk through what those indicators of performance are. I listed the secondary accountability indicators. I mean, they don't necessarily apply to us, but I think they're good to know, especially in terms of some alignment and seeing what's going on in the secondary system before the students arrive to you on the post-secondary side. And so Perkins requires 7 secondary performance indicators for all secondary recipients. And so for the required ones, they all have to include those, but then they also have to include another one. They have to select one measure there's 3 measures that Perkins lists, and they have to select one. And Illinois selected the attaining post-secondary credentials around program quality. And then they also have to develop another measure of student success in CTE that are statewide, valid, and reliable and comparable across the state. And so ISB chose the work-based learning. And so they have 9 accountability indicators, whereas we in post-secondary, we have 3. So 1P1 is post-secondary program placement, 2P1 is earned recognized post-secondary credential, and 3P1 is non-traditional program concentration. And as you can see, we're looking at CTE concentrators in terms of in terms of determining who we're counting in our accountability. And I also wanted to note, like, when you hear non-traditional, and that word means a lot, but whenever we're talking about non-traditional in Perkins, we're talking about the Perkins definition, which is we're talking about non-traditional fields, and that's occupations or fields of work such as careers in computer science, technology, and other current and emerging high-skill occupations for which individuals from one gender comprise less than 25% of the individuals employed in such occupation or field of work. So if a student is in a CTE program of study where their gender comprises less than 25%, then they are considered in a non-traditional program. So of course, our common examples are always like women in welding, men in nursing, and those can change over time. There is a non-traditional crosswalk that will make sure that we share in resources. So if you're wondering what programs of study or careers are considered non-traditional, you can look at that crosswalk. So I know like sometimes people think non-traditional in terms of age, but that's not the case here. We're talking about gender. And at the time, this is binary. Um, and so I just wanted to throw that out there. Uh-oh, skipped a lot. Okay. So now onto the so what. So again, that was just a part of our deep dive. So we're not done. But just a bit of an introduction to Perkins, an overview of the major tenets. But then to continue our deep dive, there are 224 sections in the Perkins text. And I'm going to talk about all of them. Oh, forgot I'm not in person, sorry. So we're not going to talk about all of them, but I want to focus on 5 areas that I think impact you the most as Perkins administrators. So the first is the Perkins V state plan. And so what I've done when I set these, each of the 5 up, I have the sections of Perkins that you can find information, more information, or, where Perkins discusses these areas. So there's a few places, well, it's all in section 122 of Perkins, but a couple different areas where they talk about state plan submission, revisions, the hearing process, stakeholder engagement, and public comment. So if you're wanting to know more, then please feel free to check out Perkins, and you should be able to find them. You find the state plan information in those sections. So I do want to talk about though our Illinois state plan, Perkins state plan for FY25 through 28. And so our state plan was developed again in collaboration with ISB. We did engage stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier. We were at some our Perkins administrators meetings where we start to kind of talk about the state plan, and then again put it out there for public comment. And our state plan was submitted to the U.S. Department of Education earlier this year, and it was approved in July. So our state plan was approved. If you're following along on a national level, there are some proposed revisions to the Perkins state plan on the federal level, and a place where if you're interested and you want to submit public comment to the feds about the proposed changes that they're suggesting for the state plan, and then for the consolidated annual report, that is where we as a state agency, so ISB and ICCB, report our progress as a state. So using the data, from all of you, all the community colleges, and, what we're doing on the state level as well. We report that to the federal government every year. And so they're proposing some changes to that, to the CAR and to the Perkins state plan. And there could be some implications. So if you're interested, I would really encourage you to check out that. You can find information on the U.S. Department of Ed's website. Advanced CTE has been doing some work. Advanced CTE and they've been doing work to kind of address and highlight some of their concerns with the revisions, with the planned revisions. And so I encourage you to all check that out. So I just wanted to dive back into our state plan as it is now. I mentioned that because with their required revisions, if they go through, it could require a revision to our state plan, and it could require revisions to the performance indicators, the state determined levels of performance indicators that we identified for FY25 through 28. So I think so. I wanted to note our goals. So um this is just like the high level, these are the goals, but there's also a lot of activities that we have included in the state plan that talk about how, as a state, we're gonna carry out these goals. So I'm gonna go through each of the goals, but I encourage you to check out the state plan. I have it linked here. You can also just Google it. It'll come up for you. But the state plan is really important for you as a Perkins administrator because that is how the state of Illinois intends to carry out Perkins, and that does inform how you on a local level will carry out Perkins because your 4-year goals and your 4-year application and your annual objectives have to be aligned to the state plan. And so undergirding our state plan is equity as a foundational tenet. And so we will increase educational equity for members of special populations as defined by Perkins V and others who have been or are marginalized by education and workforce systems. So that's a foundational tenet that you'll see throughout the state plan. So goal 1 is increasing the percentage of individuals who obtain a post-secondary certificate, degree, or industry recognized credential. Goal 2 is strengthening CTE offerings by improving access, program quality, and transition points between education and workforce systems and programs. Goal 3 is increasing participation in meaningful CTE early college credit. Goal 4 is increasing responsiveness to local, regional, and state workforce needs based on labor market information and employer input. Goal 5 is recruit and retain a sustainable pipeline of CTE educators. Goal 6 is to expand access to quality work-based learning for all students. And so again, these are our goals on the state level. And so we have activities that we have listed where we will support these goals. And additionally, like I said, the locals, you as community colleges, align your activities with these goals, and therefore we all are able to achieve the goals together because we understand that, when it comes to Perkins, like we're providing the statewide oversight, technical assistance, professional development, support, but it's you actually on the ground doing the work that help the state to achieve our goals. So when we're reporting to Octave, to the U.S. Department of Education, we're reporting your success. So it's important that your activities, your goals, your activities every year are aligned to the state plan's goals. So next is the local application. So there are a couple sections that kind of talk about the local application. As many of you probably know, though funds are allocated by formula, you still have to write a local application every year in order to receive the funds. And so the Perkins Section 134 lists the requirements that states have to include in the local application. And additionally, the required uses of funds in Section 135, those also have to be included in the local application. And so I did link federal Perkins application requirements and ICCB local application crosswalk. So that will allow you to see exactly what the Perkins, so on that I listed every Perkins requirement that Perkins says is required to be included in the local application via the Section 134, as well as the local uses of funds. I listed everyone out and then listed the question in the application, which includes all components of the application, the annual work plan, as well as the comprehensive local needs assessment. So I listed a crosswalk so you can see, this is what Perkins requires, and here's where I can find the question in the application. And I think on there, on that sheet, I think there might be like two additional. So we are required to list all of the application components that Perkins lays out. However, we can add components as well. But I think on our post-secondary, there's only like two, maybe additional questions that weren't directly from Perkins 5. And those are listed on that crosswalk. So the application is typically due in May each year, and we always have a Perkins Administrator Cohort meeting in the spring where we talk about the details, the application components that will be coming up. And so look forward to that if you haven't experienced that yet. We usually have the Perkins Administrator meeting is usually in March, and then applications are due in May. And I just wanted to point out some of these are all of the applications materials and when they're due. So I kind of did this as a 4-year cycle because with the 4-year Perkins plan, we have a 4-year application cycle. And so in the first year, you have a more robust application where you're detailing long-term goals that you're gonna work to achieve over the 4 years, as well as annual objectives that you'll, work to complete every year that'll help you to then achieve your long-term goal, right? And so that we call that the 4-year application because it's where you do planning. And so every year of the cycle, you're going to complete an application cover page. Every year of the cycle, you'll complete an annual work plan. And so within that annual work plan, there are two components. One is the annual accountability report, and that's where you conduct your performance data analysis. You provide a performance data report, analyze your data, and then if you're underperforming, not meeting the Perkins indicators of performance, then you have to complete a performance improvement plan. And also everyone is required to write a narrative about their improvement. And then the other component of the annual work plan is the annual activity plan and then programs of study. And so in that's where you lay out all of your activities. That's where the bulk of our application lies, with all of the requirements that Perkins says needs to be in the local application. That's where we ask all the questions. So, detailing activities about all the components of that Perkins requires. So probably many of you probably were there to complete the application this year. If not, some of you are probably working on your Perkins quarterly quarter one report that's due on the 30th. And in that, so the annual work plan also contains the quarterly reporting template. And so you're required to submit quarterly reports throughout the cycle of your grant. And you do that through the annual work plan. So you've had your activities where you detailed them at the beginning of the year, or you update them if you have budget modifications or, changes in scope. And then you report on those. So I pointed that out to say that even if you didn't work on the annual work plan, you might still be familiar with it if you're preparing your quarterly reports. A uniform budget is required every year of the application cycle. And so is an acknowledgement of grant processes. That's just a short document just to check off, like I know when reports are due, I know what I need to do if I need a budget modification, things like that. And then the comprehensive local needs assessment, we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but again, that's due not less than every 2 years. So every 2 years is when those are due. And that's usually in year 1 and then year 3. And so you all or your institutions just completed a CLNA with the FY25 application. And so the next time it will be due is FY27. And then along with the CLNA, you also have to complete a CLNA outcomes review. And then I just listed that the application narrative where you complete the local 4-year planning, again, your long-term goals, your annual objectives, that's always done in year one. So if you look at your current application for FY25, that is we call it the 4-year application because that's where you're doing the bulk of the planning. And then you can see again in year two, you won't be completing the CLNA outcomes review or the application narrative. But, again, you'll complete those requirements that are due every year. And then barring any unforeseen circumstances, we committed to letting people know, because I think one of the challenges that people expressed were, we're having our Perkins administrator meeting in March. The application is due in May. There's not enough time. But the good thing about, so we committed to giving you the due dates. So you can expect that in FY26, your FY26 application is going to be due May 16th, 2025. And what you can also note is that the application materials will not be changing. So like the questions that are the annual work plan, not saying like repeat that, we'll change, the year, and we might even change like the document, but the content will not change. So none of the questions are going to change because again, they come directly from Perkins. And we just went through a process earlier this year, the end of last year, going into the beginning of this year, where we revised the Perkins application to kind of streamline it. Where we engage stakeholders, and some of you might have participated, but we engaged stakeholders to kind of get the application to a place where, we thought it would be a little more streamlined for you all. And so hopefully that was helpful. The streamlining application was helpful for the process this past fiscal year, but you can expect that annual work plan, the questions that are contained. So here, from here what's going to be required of you, and then the due date. And so if you wanted to like begin to think ahead and kind of work ahead on your application, you can, because you'll have the contents even though you won't have the actual documents until they're released in sometime in March. Hope that makes sense. All right, so switching gears to local uses of funds, that comes from section 135. So Perkins lays out the required uses of funds. There are 6 required uses of funds, and then there's also several permissible uses of funds that are listed within the required uses of funds. So I'm saying, like, please look at the full text of Perkins to see all the permissible uses of funds, but we will talk about the required. Also note that, again, like I said, the required uses of funds are built into your Perkins application. Notice I have my watch on upside down. Okay, sorry about that. So administrative costs, something else to note, that you can't exceed 5% of your total allocation for your admin costs or indirect costs. So here are the 6 required uses of funds. 1 is offering career exploration and development activities. I won't read the finer print, but that, like, the finer print comes directly from Perkins. And then again, there are a lot more permissible uses of funds. So like it'll detail, like, so here's how you can carry out career exploration development activities. So the legislation is our best friend. The second required use of funds is providing professional development. The third is providing students with skills needed to pursue careers in high skill, high wage, or in demand industries. The fourth is supporting integration of academic skills into CTE programs and programs of study. And then planning and carrying out elements supporting implementation of CTE programs and programs of study that increase student achievement. And then finally, developing and implementing evaluations of Perkins funded activities. So again, get familiar with this because it tells you exactly how you can use your funds. And again, permissible ways. So you can get creative. Perkins really is all about innovation. And I think Perkins 5 expanded the way that funds could be used. And so I encourage you to take advantage of that. The next section that I think is important that you'll like really that's real like one of the major things that uh we do is programs of study. And so section 341 talks about the definition, and then there's also a requirement that the local application has to have at least one program of study. So that's where you'll talk about your program of study focus in the application. So I just want to briefly go over programs of study. And again, sorry, some of this is repetitive for people who have been doing this. And especially if you just came to the fall Perkins administrators meeting. But a program of study, and I mentioned this earlier, so I'm not going to read the whole definition, but this is the definition of a program of study. Comes directly from Perkins. So Perkins 5 requires states to define size, scope, and quality. It also requires a process for approving locally developed programs of study. And then to use Perkins funds at your institutions, your programs of study must meet or be working towards meeting the definition of size, scope, and quality. And so funding a program of study means direct program costs like supplies, equipment, instructor salaries, and things like that. And so there are situations where you might have a program that you've offered at the college for years and years and years. But if it doesn't meet the definition of size, scope, and quality, then you can't use Perkins funds towards that. It's not to say that you can, obviously students can still, you can still offer the program. You just can't use Perkins funding, right? And so, but if that in case that does happen, a lot of the times where I think where some of the challenges are is the dual credit piece, because dual credit is a required component of a program of study. And so sometimes a program of study might not meet the quality definition because there is no dual credit. Then students in that program of study or program, because it's not meeting the definition of a program of study. So students in that program is still a CTE program. So if you have students that are in that program that are special populations, they can still receive that allowable direct student support, such as transportation assistance. If you're providing Linden libraries, with laptops or textbooks, if you're providing childcare support, things like that, students can still receive those funds. And then CTE instructors or staff that are working in that program can still receive professional development support through Perkins funding, but you just cannot directly support the program. So you want to make sure that that the students and the faculty and instructors still have access to the support, especially for special populations, and then that they have access to professional development through Perkins. I just wanted to throw that out there. So our current policy is that programs of study can be funded for 2 years while you work towards meeting the requirements of a program of study. And this was really implemented 5 years ago when we were going into the initial state plan for FY21 through 24, where this process was new for us. And so we'd worked to develop the definitions of quality and the approval process. And because it was new, it was going to take a while for programs of study to kind of meet that definition. And so we made the exception that you can use funding for those 2 years while you're meeting those requirements. But then after that, prior to the third year, applications have to be submitted to ICCB for approval to continue using Perkins funding. And then I kind of already mentioned this about the professional development and the allowable direct student support, even if a program of study is not able to be approved. And I just wanted to briefly talk about the definitions. So Perkins requires that each state develop their own definition of size, scope, and quality. And so our definition is shared. Both secondary and post-secondary, we all have the same definition of a program of study. So with size, that means that our definition is that local recipients must implement and offer at least one state-approved program of study in one of the nationally recognized career clusters. And then all programs of study must be aligned to state, regional, or local in-demand sectors using labor market information. Again, that's one of the major tenets of Perkins. Post-secondary recipients have to follow local board policies on class size, and then the size of the program should appropriately meet labor market demand. So that's our definition of size. Our definition of scope is that a program of study provides students with a strong experience in and comprehensive understanding of all aspects of an industry. Then that the scope of a program must be specified through curricular development, evaluation, and revision, and that program scope must be defined in consultation with all stakeholders, including business and industry. And so you'll find, if you've had an opportunity to look at the program of study approval form or application, that our size and scope are also incorporated within our quality definition. And so for our quality definition, there are 9 quality components, and these are far more detailed in the program of study application or approval form. So you can check those out there. We also have the programs of study expectations tool that ICSPS worked to develop. So as you're supporting your colleagues on campus to get programs of study approved, those are some of the resources that you should be using. The program of study expectations tool, as well as the application form. And so the 9 quality components are development and engagement, employer-informed competencies and skills, instructional sequence, work-based learning, recruitment and access, academic instruction and supports, instructors, facilities and equipment, and continuous improvement. Again, way more detail in our resources. This is just, giving you the information without making this a programs of study presentation. And then finally, the last area that I think is important, not that all areas of Perkins 224 sections are not, but again, these are just the ones that I think you'll spend the most time on, you might have the most questions on, and I just wanted to provide where you can find information. Again, obviously, we, your core Perkins team, are a resource as well. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. But like I just wanted to point out how everything that we do comes from Perkins. So the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, or the CLNA, here are all the sections where that is. It's all section 134, but the various components. This is what the cover looks like. And that was developed in consultation with the Office of Community College Research and Leadership, or OCCRL. And I do want to plug that OCCRL. So they are conducting a cohort right now of a few colleges where they're like working through the CLNA. And we're going to make that available to everyone. So there'll be 4 sessions with some resources that we'll be able to provide, and so you'll be able to review that. If you're new to the CLNA and you haven't, you're not able to participate, you weren't selected to participate in that cohort, you'll still have access to the resources. So we'll share those as they become available. But they're doing a kind of like a deep dive into the CLNA to provide support in facilitating the process. So what is the CLNA? It is, I'll read it, sorry. Data informed continuous improvement process for community colleges to assess the extent to which their career technical education programs and programs of study are aligned with local workforce and economic needs in 6 key areas. So the CLNA has you look at student performance data, size, scope, quality is defined by the state plan, which we just talked about. Labor market alignment, which again, one of those major tenets that you see a lot. Progress towards implementing CTE programs of study, recruitment, retention, and training of faculty and staff, and progress toward improving access and equity. And so I think the main thing to call out about the CLNA, well, a few things. First is that it's completed, like we said, every 2 years, and it is used, it's designed to inform your local application. And so you'll see like, hey, questions about how did the CLNA inform your program study focus, and it just really helps you to identify what students to provide additional support to, maybe because they're, experiencing equity gaps, what your labor market needs and all of that. So you do that through the comprehensive local needs assessment. And it's really nice now with a lot of different, ours is equity centered. So there's a lot of work around equity in the state throughout the community college system. So as you know, colleges are required to complete and submit equity plans. And so there's a lot of alignment between the CLNA equity plans, your college's strategic plan. So just want to throw that out there. And then within the CLNA process, there are various stakeholders that must be engaged to complete the process. So I won't read them all, they're here. I think one population that is often missed is parents and students. And I know like parents is probably not as feasible on the post-secondary side, but students and capturing student voice in the CLNA is very important. And so that is an area that I think a lot of colleges could really strive to make sure that they're including student voice and representatives of special populations. Okay, let's see. So now what? So how will you apply today's information? Let me see if I can. Okay. Trying to see if I had any questions. So I want to go into a discussion, like let's chat. So now that there's a lot of information received today, again, some of it you might have already known, because I know some of you have been working with Perkins for a while. But I just want to talk about how you might approach the Perkins grant going forward. So I invite you all to come off mute and let's chat. So as a result of today's session, what is something that you might need to start doing, you might need to stop doing, or you look forward to continuing to do or to expand? So please feel free, no need to raise your hand, come off of mute, and or if you prefer to put it in the chat, you can do that too.
So I think the biggest thing for me being a new person very recently is the awareness that this kind of has to be an ongoing process. It's very comprehensive. You can't really wait until March to get started. And I think that's the mistake that I made, not knowing any better. But it feels like this needs to be kind of a year-round ongoing process. Don't wait for the next CLNA, keep working on it all along the way. Don't wait for March for the next annual plan, because there's a lot of good things that can be done, but some of them take time to plan, or even like data gathering takes time. To talk to all those groups that you just showed on the previous slide, it takes time. You can't just throw it together at the last minute.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Joe. I definitely agree. That's what we should be doing. And we're doing it too, like on the state level. Like always, like, there's just like a lot of just preparation. It's a continuous cycle. So I definitely agree. And that's one of the things I definitely want to drive home with the CLNA for sure, because that's a really heavy lift. And you're required to use it to inform your application. And so you can't wait until March and think you're going to be able to do the CLNA and your application. And so hopefully that's one of the part of our technical assistance through the cohort that we have going on right now and the materials that we'll share, like kind of setting up planning on how you can begin to like incorporate that. And so you're not waiting. So yeah, that is a very good point and one that I highly will agree with and uplift and if there's any support that you all need, like I said, that's why I like to put it out there that the application materials are not going to change. The CLNA for the time being is not going to change, and even if it does, like think the contents are required by Perkins and that is not changing. So if things might look different, but the content is going to be the same, and so there's no reason why you know you can't get going. The other thing about Perkins is that it's been here for a while, and like I just don't anticipate it going anywhere. So it's like this is one of the grants that you can look forward to, and you can look forward to being innovative with, and meeting the needs. I mean, and I think that's the good part about the CLNA is that it's requiring you to continuously assess what you need and being able to respond to that. Um, um, I think that's awesome. So, all right. Anybody else want to share before we move on to the next question?
This question might be more for my colleagues across the institutions. We have a hard time collecting data. Um, Being from one of the 7 city colleges of Chicago, most of our data is collected through our online application. However, there's data that's missing. So how do our other partners collect specific data to single parents? Do you collaborate with your wellness center? Do you collaborate with other, departments? How are you desegregating some of this data?
Um, so I'm not at the institutions, but and this might be something that you're already doing, which is not necessarily reliable, but and I know a lot of people use surveys, um, where they're surveying students. So sometimes it's through being able to provide, like they'll give students an application to identify whether or not they're a special population and if they need support in that way. But I think what I find the challenge with using surveys is, I mean, obviously, and as with all data, is kind of like, especially with the special populations, you're requiring relying on students to self-report, and that can be a challenge. And so surveys are not, you're not going to capture everyone. It's the students who complete them. So maybe it's going to every class and issuing the survey there. What I think the issue is with surveys though is that it doesn't get to IR, to your institutional research, and therefore it doesn't get reported to ICCB. And so I would say that surveys are a way that I found that people collect data as well as like through the application process. But I think you should also be having conversations with your institutional research to determine the best way to collect data, ensuring that they're understanding what data needs to be collected and provided to ICCB, where ICCB pulls the data from. We have a document that shows you so the data that, and I had a note, but I forgot to talk about it. But when you're looking at data, I mean, obviously you can use as your institution whatever institutional data or means of data that you have at your institution. But every year when you're going to submit your application or you plan to complete your application, our ICCB's research and analytics team updates PODS 2.0, which is your post-secondary data dashboard, where it lists all your data on the Perkins indicators of performance, as well as disaggregated by special populations, disaggregated by race, like all the ways that Perkins requires that data is disaggregated. So that information is provided to you, but it's only as good as what the college provides to ICCB. And so that's what I'm saying with the survey data. Sometimes data is missed, but we do have our research and analytics has a nice flow chart that shows you where ICCB pulls the data to provide to the colleges on their Perkins indicators of performance. And so using that might be a good way to start a conversation with IR, like, hey, ICCB is getting this data from here. How can we help our institutional research at our colleges ensure that they are collecting them and then providing that data to ICCB? So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's something that I'll offer.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Anybody else have anything they want to? Okay. So I'll just ask a couple more questions and then I'll let you all go. Is there any way that anyone plans to use the information discussed today to inform how they're going to administer Perkins, just like on a daily basis? And then the other part is that any way you might use it. I mean, Joel shared, what he'll do, but how will you use the information to inform the next Perkins application process? Anybody have anything they want to add or share before we all go? Go ahead.
So I have a question. We looked at several years of our CLNA data to kind of compare and see where we were going. Our LWIA data doesn't change, but every 10 years. Labor data is several years behind. And in our rural area, our data does not change very much from application cycle to application cycle.
Mhm.
And yet we kind of get comments from Perkins, that maybe it should be changing, but the data does not reflect much change in our area, in our community, in our enrollment. Even when enrollment goes up, it only goes up a couple of percent. There is nothing really outstandingly different from application cycle to application cycle. It's almost kind of flat, so to speak, in a way. So what do you suggest for areas, especially rural areas that don't have a lot or see a lot of significant change in the industry, workforce, students?
So I guess I would suggest so again, this is just not with full information and being able to point to concrete. So I would say, are there other sources of data that can be used? And that's a conversation that we can have, and even talk with OCC or RL about some other sources of data that we might be able to look at. And also, if it's not changing, and you're looking at your disaggregated data and things like that, and nothing is changing, I would say because you still have to complete it, then maybe it'll still are there programs? So okay, well, this year we're gonna focus on maybe that it identified 3 programs and they don't change over the course of the next CLNA. We'll focus on 1 program this year, just kind of use it for planning is what I'll say. And that's just off the top of my head, some ideas, but it's something I can think through and we can try to better support you on and share with others on how to address that when your data isn't changing. So again, looking at other data sources and then also using it to prioritize how you address the gaps that are showing up. And then I would question too, if the data's not changing, are your gaps, are your equity gaps changing? Are they improving? That's something else to look at because that's part of your data. So are you finding the same equity gaps year after year? And then we probably have to look at the activities that you're developing to address those gaps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else or any other questions before we hop off? Well, again, if you have questions, send them our way. You can reach out to me, Felita, Katie, or Aja. If there's something else that you're like, hey, this is not a good use of my time. Again, I appreciate you all being here. And again, take what you need, leave the rest. But if there's something that's missing, something you want to talk about, I am definitely open to feedback because I want this to be useful for you all as Perkins administrators and hopefully, again, for new Perkins administrators as well. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll see you next week.